Today, I just want to tip my hat to my dear friend and colleague, Mark Franco, out at the West Los Angeles Bujinkan Dojo. Now, the reason why this conversation is so important and you're going to find some value from it is not only is Mark a wealth of knowledge, he's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, and he's been a student of this art for decades and decades. So there's that. More importantly, it means something to me that the generation of this project was through conversations that he and I had together. Over 20 years now, Mark and I have been on the phone, and sometimes our conversations seem like just minutes. But then when I look at my watch, hours and hours have gone by. So I think it's important that his voice be heard as we kick off and his spirit is brought into this. So without further ado, I want to welcome you into the conversation. There's so much information here. I really hope you get some value from it. And I look forward to hearing from you about what some of your key takeaways were.
Welcome to Shugyo, Reflections on the Path to Self-Mastery and Forging the Way. My name is Adam Mitchell. I'm your host and fellow student along this path.
Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most foundational topics in terms of traditional martial arts, and that is in the Japanese arts called Kamai, often referred to as the posture or the foundation or the base. Oftentimes, Kamai are seen as different, literally postures that you may be standing in with a sword or with your body. And I want to go into some of the depths of this topic because oftentimes I feel as though it's very misunderstood, it's misrepresented, and oftentimes it's taught in ways that just don't really make sense. And hopefully this will inspire you to take some deeper steps into this topic and have some more educated conversation and be able to really understand the importance of Kamai. Today, I've invited my friend from another organization, Mark Franco, and Mark is not only an accomplished martial artist, but also someone with deep experience in Chinese medicine. Mark, welcome to the podcast, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Adam?
I'm good. I'm glad you're here.
Me too.
All right. So, Mark, we're just getting started here, and the topic that I wanted to have a conversation with you about is really focused on Kamai, what it means collectively in our art, what it means in martial arts is maybe we can explore as a whole. But also I'd like you to bring not only from your martial arts experience, but also your experience in Chinese medicine, your experience in kinesiology. And I know a lot of the work and experience I've had with you in the past has really been centered around so much functional movement in the martial art that's really rooted in Kamai. You and I have had conversations over the many years we've known each other about this one topic. And oftentimes I think when you and I go to Japan to train, it's the dimensions of this conversation that we're looking for training in, where so many times we could go and we can ask our teachers to work with us on some of the like really high level stuff, the complicated stuff. But I think you and I will both agree that that it really kind of starts and ends here with this word Kamai. However, before we get into it, what I'd like to ask from you is if you could just give everyone who's listening here who may not know you or the work that you've been doing over the years, if you could just give yourself a quick introduction here and let us know a little bit more about yourself.
Well, so my name is Mark Franco. I'm from Los Angeles, California, originally from Santa Monica, California. Started studying in the Bujinkan in right around 1989, going into 1990 with my first teacher, Kevin Millis. Continued to move forward in the training, and it was around 2002, I believe, that I met Monako Sensei. At that time, because of the foundational work that he seemed to that he conveys, I joined the Jinenkan for probably about, I think it was about 4 years, give or take, 5 years. I can't remember the time, and then went met Kasem at a certain time that was a pivotal time within my training, and then landed back in the Bujinkan and have been studying since then. But obviously, you and I continue to collaborate and even train together, as friends and as martial artists, trying to understand and develop, this style. I've been practicing Chinese medicine. Actually, started studying Chinese medicine at 14, 15 years old, I think I was, and have been practicing Chinese medicine, or I got licensed in 2000. So that work. Other things that I've done Chinese internal martial arts and things like that, which I think I'll touch on within this conversation.
Right.
Xingyi, Bagua, Tai Chi, things like that, as well as other martial arts that have influenced, people with like Richard Elias and people like that, Toby Threadgill, stuff like that. So anyway, that's pretty well-rounded summation of what I have. I do have a family. I have a daughter and all that stuff. So there's that as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that. So let's get right into the topic, Mark. And we're going to just, coming from different organizations, but also having some overlap in training. We met many, many years ago when you were in the Jinenkan, and it's been a great relationship since then. And we've had so many conversations going deep on so many different topics. And I think that this is one, as I just previously mentioned, one that I know is extremely important to you in your teaching, in your own pursuit of martial arts, as is mine. And that is Kamai. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this be one of the kickoff episodes is because it's often like something we teach. It's sort of like the kickoff class. It's some of the first things we teach. However, in my experience, it is Kamai, and we'll start to sort of deconstruct that word a little bit more so that we understand it. I'm not going to assume that the listeners even, or anybody who's watching this, even knows what the word means. But it's really something where we begin and we actually go full circle and end with Kamai. So if we start with the basic foundational postures of a specific set of movements or a specific set of taijutsu or jujitsu or kenjutsu, and we teach a person how to stand, how to hold their knees over their feet, how to distribute their weight properly, how to keep their back straight, all these very, very basic foundational things. We start there. However, we carry that into now from a static position into actually movement and carried momentum. And we can talk about inertia and distribution of weight and stuff in movement, which I want to get into. However, just from a real 800-foot view, and I want to hear yours, and we can compare some notes here, is that when the student that I work with begins at this point, and how my teacher taught me, is that is the foundation or the platform that they go into the basics and then from there it begins to evolve. It becomes more stable. They start to develop greater range of motion. They begin to develop more strength and stability in their movement as they gradually begin those fundamentals. And then from there, they move into form and they start to apply those fundamentals into form. And the structure is so important here in their base. And then as they go through the form and they become, I won't say they've mastered it, but they become competent in those forms and they understand the deeper dimensions of the forms, then they return back to Kamai. So it's kind of like you go in this full circle. And then when you get to that, when you complete that full circle and you round up back at Kamai, you're like, wow, this is where a lot of this, a lot of us say, I'm just getting started in this. And yeah, I've been in this for almost all of my life, but I can honestly say each time I finish that lap, I'm like, man, I'm just beginning. And I don't really I'm just learning how my body is. This is how I really begin the conversation of Kamai with a student of any background or level. Tell me, where are you with this? Where's the starting point for you, Mark?
Well, yeah, I mean, Kamai obviously is a foundational building block that in my school, that it's the first introduction into how you take space, right? How you take up space, and also what is your body doing. And it's very uncomfortable. If it's not uncomfortable, then I think that there's, it's part of what we call the taihen, right? The body changing. It changes the body to start to move and have, like what you mentioned, the correct posture, the straight spine, making sure that there is correct body alignment and things of that nature. In a lot of the work that I've done with Chinese medicine, with Taoist internal stuff, with Chinese internal arts and things of that nature, and even in some of the Japanese martial arts, you start looking at how the different layers of where the muscles, what are the muscles doing, what are the tendons doing, what are the bones doing, what's the skin doing, what's the breath doing, what's, all these different pieces. How are you aligned to heaven and earth? I mean, that's a huge part of I know with my students, the first thing I teach them is connecting to heaven and earth. And there you have the Tenchi Jin, right? You have the heaven, earth, and man connection. That in itself carries into the rest of the Kamai. And I find that it's I liken it to learning music, right? Let's say the guitar, you're learning the chords, you're learning that uncomfortableness of really making your fingers do things that they're not used to doing, and it's uncomfortable in the beginning. Then it becomes second nature. And from there you can just start, eventually, as you get to and I'm sure we'll talk about the Shuhari, you get to that Ri stage where you're just jamming. It's no longer, you don't think about things in the same way. It's a big subject, but it's very critical. And I'll say that in my dojo, you have to have it correct, or else the other stuff I can't stack anything else on top of it. I don't know if that's how that works for you, if that answers your question, but
yeah, I think it's a great starting point. It's really one of the acronyms that I follow that I've used in my teaching always is form, accuracy, speed, timing. There's two more, and the acronym just means fast. It's pretty common. It's used in different disciplines and sports and elsewhere. So it's not something I made up by any means. However, there are two more to make yourself faster. There's an E and an R. Form, though, in this Kamai, in the body's position, in its starting point, is we find in Budo is very interesting, because we not only talk about the physical posture of the body, but also the mental position of the person and the emotional state that they're existing in. We could also maybe even go into the spiritual realm, where, when you're in certain meditation or in certain states of prayer, the body is in a different Kamai. However, in the context of martial arts training, when we talk about Kamai, all these different, the range of motion, the building of the strength of the muscles and the tendons, the flexibility, the tactical positioning, all these sort of root priorities that we're trying to teach to our students, they also have to be coupled with intention. They also have to be coupled with a frame of mind and purpose. And I liken this to, like, it's body language, right? The first example I always give, Mark, is, I had an Boston Irish grandmother, and I knew when I walked in the house, if she was not happy with me, she didn't get in a fighting stance, or she didn't hold a pot up in her hand or anything like that. But I knew, like, I could tell by the energy that she was giving, the positioning, she didn't have a frown on her face or anything, but you just knew. And I use that example sometimes when I'm working with new students on this, so that they understand that Kamai is not just the position or posture of the body, or how you're holding the weapon, everything, but also a frame of mind and the body's language. This is where I think there's a segue that, in my own experience, in our collective art, too many people have kind of taken a wrong turn, and they've misunderstood Kamai and intention and what that means. And I was wondering if we could step into that conversation and how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with my experience, and we'll talk about our common ground, which is in the Jinenkan, I know that there are a lot of the Kamai is, there's intentions with each Kamai. And I think that that's a great foundation for the beginning and intermediate students. I know that, and when you start looking within the Bujinkan, Hatsumi Sensei, as he starts to elevate you to the next levels, it's how not to give intention, or how to change intention, or that each Kamai, it's not fixed. It's not anything that, you can't put a box around it, or that it becomes very malleable. And the Kamai itself also becomes more of a state of mind, or even that, than the actual physical posture. And which
Can you get there without the first, though?
no, of course there's, in my opinion, that's what I
Yeah.
was saying, the elevation of, or the advancement as you develop. You start out at this very foundational. This is the Kamai. This is the posture. This is that shape. And here is the intention you're giving. And again, just because of our common ground, the intention you're putting forward with this Kamai. And you hear this as well. Hatsumi says, if you listen to his teaching, he talks about this as well. But yeah, it's the idea of not getting stuck there, not being the be all end all. It's the foundation. It's like anything, right? It's again, going back to music. You're learning your chords. You have to do it this way, or else it's not going to sound right. And so yeah, yes, I agree. There's that whole thing of, and I use similar types of examples to my students as well, of that. Your mom, when you go to put your hand in the cookie jar when you're not supposed to be grabbing a cookie, and your mom looks at you, and all of a sudden, like, ooh, I just messed up, So same kind of thing. So there, I think we're in agreement on that idea, and how, as a foundation, there's this shape, there's this feeling, and then how do you develop and grow out of it through that, for lack of a better term, that shuhari process.
It's funny you said that, because I was just thinking of the same thing when in Japan a couple of weeks ago. This is one of the main topics that Manaka Sensei was talking about, was training with shuhari, and understanding that you have the foundational things that you need to be very committed to, the root. And then from there, for those who don't understand shuhari, then you have this separation where you stay true to that root. However, you introduce new variables, new conditions to the root, and you kind of pressure test it. And then eventually you completely disconnect and release from, and in ways own, and it becomes natural, that what we're talking about. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that really that goal needs to stay more in front of the student, of you are on a process of shuhari. Right now, know your lane. Right now, you're in shu. Right now, and eventually, like you said, the intermediate student. And then I think what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is that you need to also, like, really have a goal. You have to understand this, that eventually you are going to disconnect from that. I mean, it's kind of obvious that should, in a self-defense or personal protection situation, you're not going to step into a kotoryu kopojitsu kamai.
Right.
However, the mechanics of that kamai are very important. Everything down to the position of the feet and the angle of the knee, the placement of the hips, the bend of the elbow, the direction that the hand is pointing at, and even the nose, all these things are so critically important for the beginner. They can't be overlooked. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're not able to get to that next step in the path. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and you even have to take it to, even, in my opinion, even further than that. Yeah, I mean, as we're talking about the evolution, then you start talking about what if your knee isn't aligned? What if your balance isn't there? What if your spine isn't straight? Now what do you do? You know what I mean? And I think this is, again, that's the ura side of it, right? That side where you're now looking at a totally different place. And so you start looking at all these things that are very, you start looking at all aspects of what is Kamai, and what does it mean? Like anything, I think it was a Muddy Waters or somebody who said that it's, even if you do the wrong note, it's not that one, it's a one that the next one that will correct it. In other words, even in music, you see the same thing, or in dance, when you make a misstep, it's not about the misstep, it's what happens after. And Hatsumi talks a lot about this. He talks a lot about how this is natural. It's not always going to be perfect. So in the practice, we perfect it, but we understand that it's never going to be perfect. You talked about the acronym FAST and speed, and speed in the Bujinkan is not a word that's used. We don't use speed, we use timing. And it's because one guy's going to be fast than the other one, or you may be fast today, but you're not fast tomorrow. But if your timing is correct, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter how fast you are because you have good timing. And anyway, I digress a little bit, but within that idea of now all of a sudden you go from this very static posture that now it's built into built into how you move. You no longer, the Kamai is in you. And Hatsumitsu talks a lot about how even by not having the outward appearance of a Kamai, you can still take a Kamai. And this whole, even within Shizen no Kamai exists every Kamai. So it gets very maybe esoteric, maybe I'm not sure what word to use there, but I mean, then this is the study of the art. This is why these classical arts are so different than sport martial arts, where everything is very fixed and very like it's this way and this is how we're going. And in classical martial arts, it's not that way. It's very much it becomes very abstract. So,
Right. So I may not have cleared that up. I realize I didn't give the acronym: form, accuracy, speed, timing,
I'm
and
sorry.
in order.
Okay.
And yeah, no, it's sequentially form is first, and a person really needs to learn, how to fold their bed, shine their boots, and close their locker type thing.
Mhm.
You need to learn all the very, very rudimentary, basic, fundamental things: how to walk into a dojo, how to put your shoes on the shelf. I mean, all these things are so important in traditional martial arts environment. And and that trickles down not just to the Asian arts, but also to the Western cultural and martial arts. We see it there. And so the form and making a person not only safe to train with, but making them safe to train so that they don't hurt themselves, so that they're able to develop the right principles and values in the dojo, and they understand what's going on. Once form is in place, then they move on to accuracy, where the movement is slow and they continue to train it until they're able to hit it 100 times without missing, and continue to gradually, through proper form and focus on accuracy training, then they will naturally develop speed.
I see.
That's a natural consequence or natural outcome of form, then accuracy. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and you become fast through that progression. Then when I introduce an opponent and I introduce different skill levels, different body types, different sizes, different, then I now start to work in different areas of timing. And that timing can also include how much of a barrier of safety are you putting in there? Because your timing when we go bare knuckle is going to be different than your timing when you've got boxing gloves on. That's just one example. When we train with like with Bokuto or Boken, our timing is going to be a lot different than if we are using padded chambara swords.
Right.
So things really change based on those variables, and those variables are introduced as your speed continues to evolve.
Right.
That's how I teach. Yeah, it was a great model that I learned very early on, and I've stuck with it because it makes sense and it works with students. So
no, thank you for explaining that.
Let's talk about where you feel in traditional martial arts this topic of Kamai falls short. Where do you see shortcuts being taken, not the right attention being given to it, and where can it be improved on from your opinion and your experience?
Well, like I said, in my classes, Kamai is very important, especially in the beginning levels. It's very much a part of it as you're learning this. I'm going to give an example. When I first learned Ichimonji no Kamai from Gyokoryu, and you have to profile your body, but at the same time you have to get the rear hand to the crook of the elbow, and you can't find the space, and your body's fighting itself. Then all of a sudden you start to learn how to relax your structure, and then everything starts to fall into and then once you relax your structure, then reconnect it so that it has structure, so that it's and again how to be able to have structure but relaxed, relaxed structure and things like that, where you're not a wet noodle, so to speak. And so what ends up happening is a lot of people take it for granted, or maybe don't learn it properly. Maybe again, who am I to say? But so what ends up happening is a lot of people think that it's just this position, or I think a lot of people have thought of it as a instead of a posture, more of a stance, and it's not that. I mean,
break that down for me. Break that down. The difference.
Well, A posture, a stance is something you get into when you're about to fight. Like you look at karate or any other martial art that has stances, that you jump into a stance and all of a sudden you create a shape, and that shape is how determines how you're going to react. In my understanding of our martial art, that's not the case. The posture is there to teach you body alignment and everything that we've talked about, but it's not something you jump into right when you're gonna go into take a position. You don't jump into Ichimonji no Kamai. You don't jump into Jumonji no Kamai. Your body as it's moving will have all that in it, and it's not that it goes one to the other. It's just it's all part of the movement. Your body, and this is where I think that the correct training or correct practice is important. That becomes how you move. It's not that you choose to move that way. Is you have no other way of moving other than that way because you've practiced so much. And so the saying that I heard while I was my time with Kasem, he said something very interesting. He said, everything begins and ends in Shizen. Means that, and you're natural. You're staying natural. And then something happens. And then what comes out is what you've practiced, right? It's who you are at that point. And so to me, Kamai is there as a building block, but then the evolution is that then it doesn't become that stance. You're not going into a stance per se. You may end up showing that through your movement, but it's not. It's how to because within our art, you have to. It's how do I say this? You can't show it. You're trying to. The moment you take a position, all of a sudden someone can dissect it. I'll give you an example. One time when I was younger, in my younger days, there was a guy who wanted to fight me, and we were at a local place, and I was like, okay, and I stood in Shizen no Kamai, or just a natural posture. He was a karate guy. He took a karate stance. He was like, okay, get ready. I said, I'm ready. Whenever you're ready. And he couldn't. He said he said I can't fight you because I didn't take a position. I gave him everything. I gave him everything he could have, and it was almost like it's like going into the market and you have 10 different brands of ketchup. Man, they all look good, So you give him everything because at that point, all of a sudden, the way he attacks is the way I respond, and I think this starts to look at a lot of deeper principles that are within the art, So that's how I teach it. For the first stage is yes, you learn the Kamai, and then and that's that shoot, and then we practice the Kamai. Like for example, Ichimonji no Kata. Now all of a sudden you're in you can call it the ha stage of that Kamai. Right now you're moving with the Kamai. Then later on it's just you're just in you get to the level where if someone attacks, it's already in your body. You don't have to think about it. You just start moving, and all of a sudden, if you take it, I can see that shape's kind of in there. But to your point, people don't practice that. That's a lot of times you see people who don't practice it enough, and it's not in their body. It's still in their mind. And if it's in your mind, if you have to think about it, that you're slow, right? All of a sudden, let's talk about you means that it's not part of what you do. It's what you choose to do. Martial arts, as in anything, is about practicing it so it becomes second nature.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the things that you said that I want to unpack a little bit, and then I want to get into some observations that came up when you were going through all that. You had mentioned in one of the Kamai in the art that you train that you had to relax. So it was where the arm is kind of the body's supposed to be bladed. However, you're also told that the back arm is supposed to be somewhat forward, and that it wasn't until you learned how to relax and then re-engage. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what that looks like for some of the newer students?
Well,
and some of the advanced students.
I mean, it's a process. It's something that I mean, this is, and I think this is the point of martial arts, especially classical martial arts, is that you yourself are are your worst enemy in a sense. You have to learn how to understand your own body. You have to know how to understand every facet of what you're trying to do, of what where there's tension. Can you feel it? Okay, now I can feel it, but can you disengage it? Can you relax? You know, all and is the structure correct? You know, if you relax it, now does your posture change? Does your mind change? Where is your mind in this? You know, all these different, and what, you know, hey, I don't, I no longer feel tension in my shoulders, but now all of a sudden my knees are not in line, or, you know, and so little by little, this Kamai starts to organize the body to fit the shapes of that school. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to tangent off a little bit. And this is where I see people who like, well, I studied, you know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to get this, you know, Jeet Kune Do to do that, Ninjutsu to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden you're like, yeah, you're never going to get those shapes. You have to really understand the shapes of one system, one ryuha, one, whatever that is, understand it deeply. And when I say deeply, it's not 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It's something that it is a part of what you do. You no longer have to think about it. And so this is where Kamai really starts to build those shapes, you know.
Would you also say that the Kamai is, and just kind of a side thought here based off of what you said, that Kamai ends up being somewhat of a mortar of the tradition too, where it, you know, it holds the bricks of its foundation together. Where, I mean, we you know, even though we don't train in the same organization, we both know what the foundational Kamai that you're talking about in this lineage of Gyokoryu are. The challenge that I see, the challenge that I face, is whether it's seeing high-level practitioners, either that I'm training with or someone I see online who are teaching, and they're doing very, how do I say this without coming across as judgmental or arrogant? Well, I don't care. They're not doing it right. Their bodies are weak, or their hands are just kind of like this, or they don't have the proper alignment and tension in the body, and they use some excuse of, well, that's how I feel, that's how I do it, that's how I was taught by whoever, whatever Shihan, and of course nobody was there during their training, so nobody can validate that yes or no. However, you do know as a practitioner who has put in that time, like you just mentioned, like you have, that's not right. And if this continues, the mortar becomes weak. The tradition breaks down 2 or 3 generations from now, and it just becomes very flaccid. And I'm concerned about that, which is part of the reason why I want to have this conversation. And where are you on that? How do you feel about that?
Well, currently everyone's going to practice or not practice the way they want to. I mean, I can't stop that from happening.
That's right.
You know, it is what it is. If that's how they want to practice, that's how they want to practice. Believe you me, we see it all the time. I mean, click on any YouTube on any martial art, and you'll see, you know, whatever style it is, you'll see good practitioners, you'll see bad practitioners, and everything in between. And that's just the way it is. What I think is that, you know, maybe this art isn't meant for the masses. Maybe it's only meant for those who, and any martial arts. You know, it's not meant for everybody. I've seen people, I mean, we see it right now. People who saw the UFC go in thinking they're going to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or MMA, and within 90 days or maybe 3 years or whatever, they're like, I can't do this. It hurts my body. It's too much work. I don't, you know, all that stuff. It's, yeah, it just, that's not for them, you know? And so when people don't, to do something, to do anything, it takes commitment. It takes sincere practice. It takes dedication. It takes being uncomfortable. It takes the scrutiny of other people to, you know, to tell you that that's all crap or whatever that you'll want to tell you, to say, no, I'm going to keep going. And that's Hatsumi Sensei's message through and through, is keep going. Just keep going. Just keep doing it, you know? And so for people who say, well, my teacher, well, you know, to your point, who was your teacher? You know, what was your frame of mind? You know, how dedicated were you to the practice? How well do you listen? Are you bringing your own stuff to the table? All that stuff, we know, we've heard the empty your cup when you come to class type of stuff, right? but there is a bunch of filters that we're gonna. I mean, I'll say it like this. When I first started with Kevin Millis, I was young. I mean, I was 17 going on 18. I didn't know. I even if he was teaching me correctly, I couldn't understand the teaching because my mind just wasn't there. I didn't understand the art. It took the process of meeting all these different teachers and styles and medicine and anatomy and all this stuff to get to a point that when someone said something, oh, that's what it meant. And I look back on my early days, and I was just, I was young. I was a fool, so to speak. So sometimes people, even if they're old, they're young in the art. So it's still a little bit of a naive kind of process where they just don't understand, and it takes a while. I mean, Adam, you know just as well as I do. We've had these conversations that early on you think you understand, and then as you get moving forward, like even the fact that you and I are just talking about Kamai, which is such a basic thing, and you come to realize, man, this thing is deep.
Yeah. Yeah. I had my ego really handed to me by Manaka Sensei. I was about maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little more than 10 years ago, when I went to Japan and I wanted to start preparing for Chino Menkyo. And I wanted to work on a specific lineage of sword and the most basic teachings of it, so that I could really, really hold that at that Menkyo level and really feel deserving of it. And of course, I knew the basic cuts. I knew the five basic Kamai and all the things. But as should be expected, when I get there, he's teaching me how to use my eyes, like in Seigan no Kamai, and the meaning of Seigan no Kamai, and to be able to look through and past and at and in front of, yet beyond, and how to adjust how the eyes are looking at the person. And then I'm like, wow. And then he starts talking to me as the sword is as my sword, he walks right up to the tip of my sword as I'm standing there in this posture, in this stance.
Right.
And he just keeps talking and talking and teaching me, but not breaking his eyes from my sight. And I felt this impulse to kind of have to look away and sort of reprogram, and he said, and he explains to me exactly, this is Seigan no Kamai. This is what it's, and I'm like,
yeah.
Like, okay, I'm starting all over again. I'm going home. I have to train this all over again because I have no clue what I'm talking about. And even though I think I'm there to like work in some mastery level, it's just I am naked again on the stage with and starting all over again. And then he doubles down on that and says, but this is in every weapon. This is in every taijutsu. This is the most basic level that you need to understand. And I'm like, well, okay. And this is where it drove home for me that you can learn the posture, and you can even learn the intention, and you can even have a great instructor drill you to kind of very much couple those two to make good sense. But it's not until, you will discover when you go through that tradition, like you said, you have to immerse yourself. I don't believe fully in the, sort of become, learn a lot of things and get rid of the stuff that doesn't work and keep only the stuff that does, and then move on to another art. I think, maybe people misunderstand Musashi when he taught that. I don't know. It's not my way. However, what I do know is that I haven't even gotten started on this topic because it constantly changes and becomes something more. I understood Shuhari, but actually spending an hour listening to Manaka Sensei talk about it on the floor, sitting there on the floor of the dojo, helping me to really understand the disconnection of this and what specific kata it's seen in, was completely new to me. And, I honor that so much. I'd like to maybe take this time to talk about and maybe pull out a couple of the Kamai from what you study, what I study. And so for maybe some of the newer students or people that don't, even though we are talking about a very, supposedly basic topic, I'd like to maybe have a couple case studies here, Mark, and talk about a few of them. I'll begin with the one that I always talk about, which was first introduced to me back in the 90s as Hiraichi Monji no Kamai, and be like the wind. Have the arms out and the body in this flat position, hira, and be like the wind. When I come to learn that it has really nothing to do with that, and this could be perspective of a different instructor. It could be a number of different things. However, once I understood that it being the most combative of the Kamai, because it trains your peripheral field of vision to stay wide in a state of fear, you begin, one of the first physiological changes is tunnel vision, and your peripheral field of vision closes. However, when training through constant exposure of stress in a rigorous training environment, and keeping your fingertips at your peripheral, the threshold of your peripheral field, allows you to train and condition yourself to not have that physiological response happen, and to be able to look straight ahead, but also acknowledging what's going on both sides. In basketball, it's court vision. Once I was like, okay, this makes a whole lot better sense, where you start off maybe like this, but then, two friends come in from the side, your body's naturally going to begin to open up, and then more people that open up and open up. And now you have to really sort of monitor and understand what's going on in this full 180-degree field. Once that was first taught to me, that was a real epiphany moment. This big flat posture that makes absolutely zero tactical sense for fighting suddenly became, with a flick of a switch, the most combative stance, because in it, you are completely outnumbered and surrounded. And then it flipped again, where Sensei explained to me in one of the different traditions, it doesn't mean that. It means to protect someone important behind you. So now here you are facing someone who wants to get at someone on the opposite side of you and will cut through you no matter what. So again, now you're responsible for someone else and not yourself. So it comes with this intention also of sutemi, or sacrifice, and creating this large sort of physical obstacle that someone needs to get through. These are very interesting topics to me, and they're very different than how they were first taught to me. And I continue to discover more and more in that. I'm wondering if you could share a couple, or even maybe you got some field notes there from what I just shared. What are some things that stand out to you?
Well, this is what I'll say. The elements, right? We're talking about, you start out with saying how in the beginning, a lot of people were learning, hey, this is the wind posture, the fire posture, all these different elements. I don't view it as, no, it's not that. I view it as that is a piece of what we're trying to understand from these postures. I also go into the place of, again, we talked about shuhari in that, yes, this is a shu in the ha position of hira ichimonji no kamai, or hira no kamai. And you're learning how not to have tunnel vision. But later on, maybe you can't extend your arms, but you still have to have that skill. In other words, the east side of it is now you don't need to put your body in the shape you have. That's already part of what you understand.
Yeah.
And we talked about Musashi and learning all these different things. I think this is what I believe. What do I know? I don't know. I don't know Musashi, but in my own mindset of how I think about these things is that I listen to all these people. I listen to Manaka Sensei, obviously. I listen to Ishizuka Sensei. I listen to Steve Hayes. I listen to Kasem. I listen to, and obviously Hatsumi Sensei. He's the Soke. I listen to all his students. I listen to the students who from all the different, because they've all seen something in a moment in time that they said, this is interesting. And we know that Steve, how I understand, that stuff was being talked about at a certain time about the elements and how and emotions and all this other stuff. And so when you start talking about intention, you start looking at emotions. You start saying, these emotions are there. So to me, when I hear that, I'm like, I never say, nah, that stuff, Steve, it's wrong. I always say it's fascinating. I always think to myself, it's fascinating. Where does this fit? How do we understand this? Because we obviously, if you look at his work, he talks about fear. He talks about aggressiveness. He talks about not really wanting to engage. He talks about all these things that hey, these are expressions, and these are ways to move through it so that you start to understand body movement, taijutsu. And so this is where I see the depths of the arts that we're studying. I've never seen it anywhere else. I mean, maybe it's there, but I just don't. I haven't got, maybe spent enough time in other arts to understand the stuff. But when you start looking at all these things, you start going like, wow, you start getting a really well-rounded idea of, okay, yes, we're learning this in the Kamai, but then this has to also translate into Jumonji no Kamai. This has to be in everything you do. To say it's only in here means that you limit its availability. And so my approach to Kamai is very much a, yes, you're going to learn these Kamai individually, but then as you see, and Hatsumisa talks a lot about this, is how then you continue to transform and evolve it. There was one back in the 90s, a Japanese or a Japanese person that was a student of Hatsumi Sensei, and I'm sure of another senior instructor, had to spend some time in San Francisco. So because for work, and so he was teaching he would, every once in a while give a little class or seminar. And he said something to me that was very interesting, or not to me. He said it to the group. We were practicing Kion Happo. And so you have the basic Omote Gyaku when you start looking at Torita Goho, and you had the Omote Gyaku. And then you had Omote Gyaku Tsuki. So we practice Omote Gyaku Tsuki, which is basically the wrist lock, and they attack they strike, right? And so then it's like, okay, now we're gonna do Uragyaku. That was the next stage. But he goes, then you have Uragyaku Tsuki, then you have Mushadori Tsuki. But then then you start thinking like, okay, then there has to be kicks, there has to be low, high, middle, low attacks. There has to be all these different things. Now you start just with that one kata. You don't limit it to just the attack to the face. You now start putting into those attacks into different places. So I know I'm digressing a little bit, but the Kamai is this way, in my opinion, is this way too, that you have to start seeing this as a more universal way than just as a very cut and dry, it's this, but it can't be that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think for me in the beginning, I'll gently challenge that. And I will say it has to be that for the beginner student.
Of course.
Otherwise there is no shoe. There is no shoe. And I never studied with Stephen. However, I have the highest, and I didn't even realize, now that you say it, the wind thing, that's not what I was referencing from Stephen Hayes's work. I have the highest respect for him and a very friendly relationship with him as well. If I tried, I don't think I could come up with a bad word to say or a bad experience I've had. And I also know Manaka Sensei holds him in the highest regard. However, my experience to align with what you're saying is that, and I can even go back to the exact class decades ago where this switched from this Hirachi Monji no Kamai that I learned in the 90s, and then Manaka Sensei taught it. And I'm like, oh, so it's not this wind floaty thing. And then you learn it like this for a specific reason, as it's written in the Densho, to keep your perceptions wide while gently wrapping an opponent. And then from there, we begin, as I said, we transition into the Kihon. And anybody who knows at least Manaka Sensei's way of teaching the striking basics, or the motogata as they're called in the Koto-ryu, that damn Hirachi Monji no Kamai movement is like a leaf flying through the air. And I'm like, oh, like the wind. And there we go. So to kind of support your point and saying that this is in a constant flux, however, you need to stay true to that shu. You need to stay really rooted in the foundational principle in the technique. So from that, it's where I'm immovable until in the shu, in that first stage as an instructor. Allowing too much leniency, I feel right there, allows for too much wander. And I just feel as an instructor, as a student, I've had my ego handed to me many, many, many times. And I'm only a student, but with the responsibility of teaching it, I feel as though we have to, Bobi no Kamai, another example, is to strike the opponent down with a single blow. And Bobi no Kamai, with the positioning of the hand the way it is, and the hand on the crook of the hip, it's no different than an interview stance in law enforcement. It's a position where if you take one more move, then you're getting knocked down. And I'm standing here, I'm not taking an initiative step right now. And to be able to, you can't you can't create too many margins with that in the beginning. It is what it is, and it has to be taught like that. And then through expansion and exploration, that new discoveries are found. And I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah,
Am I out there?
What's that?
Am I
Yeah,
on the?
I mean,
Am
I
I?
agree with you 100%. I mean, in the beginning, because again, that beginner student doesn't have the ideas that we have because of the experience that we've gone through. And so, yes, I agree with you 100%. You first learn that very simplistic form, and I even take it. Me personally, I take it even more basic in that I don't even worry about intention in the beginning. I don't worry about any of that. I just, hey, first worry about how to relax your body in this position that makes your body fight itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then once they start to they start to get it. Then I start giving them the more tactical intentions and things of that nature. But I think it's also critical. I think that the intention with the Kamai, with the posture, I believe they're, at least today, what I believe is that they're symbiotic. They can't exist one without the other.
Yes.
And initially, it's very symbiotic. It gives you a vessel to put all that stuff into. That's what the Kamai is. That vessel that allows you to have the intention, the position, the connection within the body, the understanding of structure, and also gives you what is the idea of how this school moves. So yeah, I agree with you. I think what happens is that after so many years, you just start to think about it differently, and so with all that in my mind, how do I keep it simple for the students, because it's very complex, as we're both talking about this. It's a very complex thing that some people, to your point, think it's very simplistic, and they don't hold it with the intention or with the correct posture or attitude or whatever that is, and then that their response isn't correct. The one thing that, if your position is correct, your Kamai is correct, then when you practice the things that press that Kamai, whether it be Tai Henjutsu, whether it be Kion, Happo, or whatever, if you're not correct, your timing will be off. You'll get hit with a stick or with an attack or with whatever you're practicing. And so again, I think we're both talking about the same thing. I think we're both in agreement that, so this teaches that, precision in movement.
Yeah, and also not wanting to overcomplicate things, but at the same time having a conversation that for those who are listening to this, are hopefully inspiring them to not shortchange this topic and to see that, hey, between you and I, Mark, we've got a lot of years in this art and in the Japanese arts, and respectively in different things too, that we can draw experience from. And to say that, no, it's not you're just striking a pose.
Right.
It's not that. It's, you used it accurately, stance. It's not just merely that there is so much depth to this that needs to be understood. I take a little bit of a different route, and I teach in together the both intention and the alignment and position of the body. However, it's not mandatory until about 3 or 4 years in that the student is able to say, well, okay, Jumonji no Kamai of Gyokoru, this is what it means. This is what's written in the scroll, so on and so forth, as you know. So
it's funny.
We do.
Yeah, it's funny that the timing is about the same, even though the approach might be slightly different. The timing, they don't really start getting. I don't really hold them responsible for those type of things until they've gotten their shodan. Until I know that they've gone through all the material, that they know how to do basic stepping and rolling and all the different things, all the facets that are in which you'll find a lot in the Tenshin and Rakuno Maki, or a lot of these basic skills, the foundational skills, so that they can learn the schools. I don't really hold them accountable for those types of things. I'm really careful on body mechanics. I mean, so much so that it's like, I want them to be able to feel from their fingertips to their toes the connection through their body, from the top to the bottom, the connections. I mean, it's and so because I'm so careful about that, then it's like, okay, now you understand your body. Okay, now let's start adding pieces to it. So, but at the end of the day, we end up at the same place.
Well, this is the next topic I have two more things I want to step into here. The first one is really about the body of work that I know that you've done on like the vertical axis and the movement that you just started talking about a little bit. I'd like to actually explore a little further in there and have you share some of your experience about the importance of the structure of Kamai and the initiation of movement, and why it's so important that the Kamai has to be correct, not just, all right, well, it's, look, I'm, you know me, I'm a stickler. If I see a photo of someone and their foot is off this way, but yet their body's going this way, I'm going to say, dude, I'm coming in on you on your left side. I'm going to smoke your wrist or your elbow. That's it. Because it's as simple as that. It doesn't get any more clear. And with my students, if a little bit's off, it means they're going to have to take an additional movement to initiate that first step. I know you've got a big body of work, like I just said, around that. Can you share a little bit with me about that and kind of go into some depth there?
Okay. I'll start with Chinese internal martial arts. I studied Tai Chi for a while in Xingyi, and with the Xingyi came the Bagua. The Bagua I don't have a lot of experience because I hadn't gotten to that part of the teaching. But within it, you have these postures, Xingyi especially, you have these postures that you are trying to understand its connection within yourself, and then later within against someone else. How your connection then starts to transmit over into someone else's body and all that. So there's a whole, and that's to where as I'm teaching, that's where you start learning, and all the joint locks and throws and things like that is how now by understanding how your body mechanics work, that starts to topple their structure. So the first thing I teach, I think I mentioned this earlier, is this heaven, earth, and man. To understand the gravity of heaven and the gravity of earth and how it connects into our bodies, and in our tanden, dantian in Chinese, on all that stuff. Then there's also the shifting of weight and things like that. That how that starts to create a different direction. The lowering, the raising and lowering of the hips, and how that starts to create all these different things. And if your Kamai isn't correct, you're going to be you're going to have instability. And again, in the beginning, that's important. It's important to that you understand your body well enough that you can feel those instabilities, so that if you're not stable, you can correct it, or how to move out of it. How to still win even if your body's not stable. But you've understood that. You've understood that to the core. And so so when you start looking at Chinese like internal practices, like some of the Taoist stuff, things like that, you start looking at the different layers that they start talking about, and they talk about this in Chinese medicine as well. You have the skin, the flesh, the muscle, the tendon, ligaments, bones, marrow, right? And so how you connect with all that stuff is a big part of, like, when I teach, it's that. And if you understand a good book that I think that everyone as a martial artist or even as a human should read is Anatomy Trains. They should have that book in their library to understand how the fascia wraps around and connects through the body. And funny enough, how that lines up to the channels that are talked about in Chinese medicine. So anyway, all these different things are really important to me on the structure side of it. Again, learning that structure, and then learning how that structure defeats an opponent's structure as you start looking at it from a martial stance. There's also, obviously, I look at it from a health stance as well, and being able to open the body. And again, I got a lot of that stuff from Xingyi, because Xingyi has a lot of really good exercises to open the body and connect to organ systems and things like that.
What about the actual first steps that you would have someone focus on once they feel as though they've practiced the Kamai? Is there something, whether it's tension in the tanden, whether it's the relaxation of the shoulders, whether it's maybe an exercise that they should work on with their spine, or is it a mindset thing? But what are let me rephrase this. What are some of the main obstacles that you see in your students that they need to get through in order to, they may have a great posture, low hips, all the things that you're looking for. However, they just jam. They're clogged being able to move from that. What would you give as some
Well, I
recommendations
mean,
there?
I hate to, it's just tension. Everyone has tension. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
they can have the lowest hips, the straightest spine, all that stuff, but then all of a sudden they're tense. And one of the
Yeah.
things that the you want to you hear this all the time in Japan, right? Chikaranai, no power. Take away the power, take away the
Yeah.
tension, take away all this stuff that's creating all these binding things like that. And you have to take that away. You have to get rid of all that stuff. And what you tend to find is the more you relax, the more effective your movement affects the person who is trying to attack you. My approach to the Kion Happo is so different than it was 20 years ago because of this. Because now I look at it from a very like body dynamics, how the body moves, how the spine moves, how the legs shift, how the up and down, how the extensions, the pullings, all these different things that are happening within the body. And if you're balanced, you're very relaxed. I mean, you're very relaxed.
For those who may not know, the Kihon Happo are that Mark's talking about are the foundational techniques of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
martial art.
So
So
we and in the martial art we study, you have what's called the Sanshin Gogyo, and that again is just there's the depth of that practice and how it really starts to change your body. This Taihen Jitsu, this way of changing the body to start moving in the way of not just what we study, but Nihon Budo, Japanese martial arts. There is a foundation, this Taijutsu, and if we start going in the historical parts of it, you'll start seeing that it starts to make way more sense. But the point is that there's this way of taijutsu, this one thing that you can hear in all martial arts in Japan, taijutsu. It's this nihon budo, this way of correct movement. I'll just say, and if you have correct taijutsu, then your everything that you do is correct movement. Whether you pick up a sword or whether you drink a cup of tea, it all has good taijutsu.
Mark, I know this is a topic books can be written about and have, but our time is only limited here on this one episode, and we can certainly talk more about it, and I'm sure we will. Before we finish up, though, is there anything you feel we didn't talk about that's important that someone who's listening to this and is interested in this topic of Kamai should know about?
The only thing I could say, and I think we did touch on it, is that you have to practice, and you have to practice with a sincerity and dedication. If you really want to learn this stuff, you have to practice. The dojo is your classroom. You have to do the homework. You have to go home and do the homework so that your teacher can look at look at your homework and see where you're deficient, and then continue to put things.
Yeah.
If you are a student or a teacher, or we're all students, right? That is like, man, this is a pretty cool perspective. Find someone that has these perspectives and just share your thoughts. I mean, there's nothing. We are all students, and there's nothing wrong. I mean,
Absolutely.
Adam and I, as well as I have a handful of friends that I talk to all the time, that we throw ideas and concepts, and hey, I kind of figured this out, or I think I figured this out. What do you think? And so, and I'll go to everyone around me. I don't rank. To me is nothing. It shouldn't be a barrier. It should be something that it's a goal to get that perfection we look at Hatsumi Sensei and we're like, man, I want to be that, or Takamatsu Sensei, I want to be that, and so we have our teachers that are helping us get to that. So anyway, the point is, practice.
Practice. You've got to train. And I couldn't agree more with your point in closing here on very often there's a filtration system in the traditional arts where if you're not going to do the practice, the art's going to break you so that you can't carry the practice forward. You can't carry those mistakes forward. And we find that, at least I see that very clearly as I get older and more mature in this art. I see that those traps that Musashi was talking about are very existent in our art. When you do make mistakes and you don't pay attention to those fine details, when you get lazy, when you try to go it on your own because you think you know better, you will get broken and you won't be able to continue. And I think your message really is, Mark, to have approach this with an open mind, but also be disciplined enough to train it and follow the process of shu ha ri, not just go straight to ri because you think you're better than everyone else, or whatever your reasons might be to do that. Yeah, this is very refreshing as always, Mark, to have these conversations with you. I always leave conversations with you kind of like saying, all right, well, what does that mean? And what, how can I expand and do better, train better, and how can I apply this in my own work? So thank you for that, man.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here and share. Hopefully this is helpful to everyone, and I love having these conversations as well. And I also, when you and I talk, it's always like it's a way to think differently, and start to practice it. Let me see how he talked about this. Let me see if I can practice it this way. Can I find that, all those things. So again, I think this is the point, right? I mean, to limit yourself and really be. There's no end. Even if you've gotten the highest rank, there's no end.
There's no end.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mark, where can anybody who's interested in keeping this conversation going with you, or learn more from you, learn more about you, where would you like them to have that at?
Well, you can always reach me at westladojo.com, and you should be able to, if you want to email me, info@westladojo.com, you can go ahead and email me there, and we can have more conversations if you like.
Great. Mark Franco, thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you. Take care.
You take care. Thank you, Adam.
Shugyo is brought to you by the Yasaragi Dojo, a traditional Japanese martial arts school and nonprofit 501c3 organization located in New York. I'm your host, Adam Mitchell, and I truly hope that you found some value and inspiration from this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about our dojo, yes, it's an actual physical dojo, not just some virtual one made up on the internet, find us on the web at yasaragidojo.com. The link is in the show notes. Or go ahead and access our free mobile app for iPhone and Android. There, you can access our daily training, coaching, live streams, meditations, workshops, and both online and in-person retreats. Our work depends on the generosity of our supporters, dedicated students around the world, and you by listening to this episode. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel, and you'll be updated on new episodes and reflections as they roll out. And if you know someone who will enjoy the conversation that we had today, please go ahead and share. Once again, my name is Adam. This is Shugyo. Until next time.